I'm Nancy Felipe Russo, and I have the honor of introducing this video tribute to Robert Sommer. Bob died last February at age 92, and he will be missed, but his legacy lives on. Bob had a gift. He had an extraordinary ability to teach people how to see the world with new eyes. And as a result of his teaching, when you're looking at the world with these new eyes, your relationship to that world changes so that you experience the world in new and different ways. And because of that gift and all the lives he's touched, he has a rippling legacy that is far-reaching. So a group of us who've been influenced by Bob Gifford, Art Gunther, Patsy Eubanks Owens, and myself, reached out to APA in Division 34 to see what we might do to recognize and to preserve Bob's more personal and unique contributions to the world. And thanks to the responsiveness and encouragement, and especially the expertise of Nelida Quintero and Catherine Perdito, who are the Division 34 program co-chairs, and then Daniel Bettendorf, the president, who is willing to cut up our clips and make them into something. Here we are. So we offer these clips in this video tribute as a small window into the complex, quirky mind of Robert Sommer. Even if you knew Bob, there may be some surprises. For example, I knew him for more than half a century and never knew he was a NASA consultant on the design of the space station. Also, there's some surprises in those clips. The story about serving a night in jail for science is priceless. So enjoy. Now, as to my own story, Bob Sommer was my teacher, mentor, my colleague, and my friend. I met him in 1963 when I went to UC Davis after graduating from a local community college. I took his courses in social and clinical psychology, and I was hooked. He supervised my honors thesis on invasions of personal space, and it gave me quite the cred as a researcher. It was in the 99th percentile of scientific literature one year and was reprinted in 10 books with royalties, no less. That was my introduction to doing research, Felipe and Sommer, 1966. Bob had a pragmatic view about academics and publication. Basically, his message was, make sure that you know the standards and make sure you have the required number of publications in the right journals, and then you can publish wherever you want. So I remembered this. I published my dissertation in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology and never looked back. I personally like to do books and book chapters and edit journals, but I will do research too. It's Bob's reminder to take a broader view, though, that to step back, to shed preconceptions, and think before engaging, that I found most valuable and I've used most often, including, by the way, in the service of Division 34. Did you ever wonder how Division 34 became the Division of Environment, Population, and Conservation Psychology? Well, here's the story. Once upon a time, in 1973, yours truly was president of Division 34. Then it was the Division of Population Psychology. So APA had a task force on environment and behavior that had completed the work and now was looking for a home base in APA, and was looking around. So time passes, the process unfolds, and to my chagrin, I find I'm ending up in a big meeting with the task force and its network, with the agenda of the meeting having Division 34 and Division 21, which was engineering psychology, vie for the new recruits. I was very uncomfortable with this. So I was up first. And then, true to Bob Sommer's advice, I thought beyond the situational demands and went to the crux of what was important in the larger context. So needless to say, my speech was short. I basically said, hey, it's not a competition. Who says you have to join just one division? Division 34 has diverse interests. They encompass built and natural environments. Our approach is to evolve in creative synthesis. And that's what we do. So join us, join Division 21, whatever works. And then Paul Nelson, who's the person to be the representative for Division 21, gets up and he says, he basically agrees with me. And in fact, I even think he said he was joining Division 34. So it was quite a night. Thanks to Bob Sommer. And that is how, under my presidency in 1973, the Division of Population Psychology became the Division of Population and Environmental Psychology. So fast forward to today, still learning, still growing, still marveling at this incredible, multifaceted world that was opened up to me by knowing Bob Sommer. And, you know, he was unique. And ordinarily describing somebody as unique is just a cliche. But I think, as you will see with these video tributes, that calling Bob unique is an understatement. In addition to participating in this tribute and having fun with learning about all this stuff, I hope to establish a mid-career award in Bob's name in Division 34 and continue the tradition of fostering creative synergism of his intellectual legacy. So the details are yet to be worked out. Stay tuned. Thanks.
I'm Patsy Eubanks Owens. I'm a professor of landscape architecture at the University of California, Davis. I actually met Bob when I first got to campus in 1990, and he invited me to come to his office for a visit. One of our colleagues had introduced us, and I remember how exciting it was to meet him, because I was familiar with his work, his research, but also how I was very taken by the fact that he was so gracious with his time and his advice. And I always found Bob was a very helpful mentor. I remember in our early conversations talking about my transitioning into university career. I was had been in private practice, and so we were talking about the work that I was doing as a landscape architect and how it was really applied research, and how I could think about the work that I was doing and putting in that framework as I was going about my career at the university. And that was very helpful to explain that work to other academics. He was a great advocate for all the landscape architecture faculty and for designers. As most of you probably know, a lot of his work applied to the creation of spaces. So that's one reason I decided today to come to the Davis Farmers Market, a place that was very important to Bob, that he was integral in helping get things going. And it's really wonderful that I live in a community where I can actually be able to enjoy and to benefit from all of Bob's work. Along with the farmers market here, he also, as you probably know, was very involved in establishing the bike path system and really promoting the use of bicycles in our community, which really is something that we all appreciate and all can benefit from every day. And so I'm very thankful to be able to live in a community where that's where I get to see a little bit of Bob every day. One of my memories of Bob is his biking through town. I would often see him, and he would have his little canvas tote bag which had a cow print on it. And so it was easy to spot Bob from a distance. And I miss seeing him doing that, but I do appreciate the fact that I get to see evidence of his work on an ongoing basis. And I would just leave it there. Bob was a great mentor, a colleague, and a friend.
Hello, Robert Gifford here. I'm happy to pay tribute to Bob Sommer and sad that he's gone. He saved a kind of failing engineering student back in the middle 60s, took me into his lab, hired me as a research assistant, sent me out to collect a lot of data about whether people have better grades when they study at the desk as recommended or anywhere else like lying on their bed while studying. And we definitively proved that it doesn't matter where you study. As in undergrad at UC Davis in the middle 60s, your grades were about the same. He later rescued me from a little scrape I got into about smoking the wrong stuff in the wrong place, and sent me wonderful reference letters up to the University of British Columbia, and it goes on from there. Bob probably is the most important man in my life, apart from my father, and I'm glad to contribute to this tribute to him. Thank you very much.
My name is Hartmut Gunther. I am Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Brasilia, Brazil. I came to Davis in 1970 to study social psychology. I never took a formal class from Bob, nor was I his student in the traditional sense, but he has had a most far-reaching impact on my private life, as my wife Isolde and daughter Louisa can attest, and certainly on my academic life, as my students, his academic grandchildren, can vouch for, as well as my involvement in furthering environmental psychology in Brazil. I still teach environmental psychology and research methods. There is hardly a class, even in research methods, where I do not refer to his work and benefit from his mentoring posture. In 1973, I moved into Bob and Barbara's house on 11th Street. Bob was to go on sabbatical, and I was to take care of the house and Bella the cat. I had already moved in when Bob's sabbatical fell through, and I ended up living with Bob and Barbara during the 1973-74 school year. The first morning after their return, Bob, as always, got up early, made a pot of coffee, and started to talk to and with his dictaphone. I too am an early riser, so, attracted by the smell of coffee, I went to the kitchen and turned to Bob to bid him a good morning. That was when I reserved my first object lesson in personal space and territoriality. He growled at me, turned around, and shut the glass door between the kitchen and his morning dictation space. Later, Barbara explained to me what had happened and what the rules were. Eventually, I was even allowed to make the second pot of coffee, and after Bob had gotten through his morning bursts of creativity, we would sit at the kitchen table and talk about the immediate and larger world from any number of perspectives, including that of environmental psychology, while we were waiting eagerly for the morning papers, true private seminars. We kept up this habit, this ritual over the years during innumerous visits, my 3 short-term sabbaticals, dealing with street trees, and traveling together, until most recently in April of 2019. His last words to Isolde and me when we left were, "You will be missed. To be certain, Bob will always be with us, even more so in this pandemic and digital age." Already in 2002, Bob observed in a chapter about personal space in a digital age in the Handbook of Environmental Psychology, one does not have to be physically present to be present. And yes, Bob, you will be missed and remembered.
I have a fond memory of Bob giving a talk at my university, then insisting on a trip to my garden where I was having tomato problems. Turns out it was tomato hornworms. Bob always had an enthusiasm for his research that spilled over into life. I took my last pre-pandemic class out to a farmer's market to code interactions. We used Bob's ideas that settings can be sociopetal, encouraging interaction, or sociofugal, discouraging interaction. We found that the farmer's market compared to the grocery store encouraged interaction even among strangers, a difficult feat in a time of cell phones. We found the farmer's market tomatoes tasted great, helped the local economy, and had a light carbon footprint. In contrast, Bob's writings emphasize how the design of the grocery store tomato resulted in a tomato that was square, could bounce, and travel well, but tasted terrible. Bob's research was always ahead of its time in emphasizing the importance of socially informed design for the design of tomatoes, farmers markets, even street trees, waiting rooms, and other settings. My students report that they're never able to see a tomato or a store or a neighborhood again without thinking about how they fit into larger social and ecological goals. Bob was always encouraging and kind to all of us at conferences. I will miss him and extend my condolences to all who knew him.
I first met Bob Sommer in the winter of 1974 when he visited our UC Irvine campus. I had organized a colloquium series that quarter at UCI on environmental psychology, and Bob was gracious enough to accept our invitation and come to campus and share with us his research at that time. And what struck me immediately from my interactions with Bob was his tremendous humility, his quality of being so down to earth, his personable qualities, his creativity. We walked around the campus, he took pictures. He was working on his book, Tight Spaces, at the time, and some of the pictures from our campus actually are included in his book. But, Bob, it goes without saying, he was one of the giants in our field, one of the founding scholars of environmental psychology. And his landmark contributions to our field were matched, and this is the important thing about Bob, those scholarly contributions were matched by his exceptional kindness and supportiveness as an inspirational mentor, colleague, and friend. Whenever I had the good fortune to visit with Bob, either in Irvine or in Davis or at conferences over the years, he was always effervescently positive, flowing with creative ideas, and intensely interested in what his colleagues and students were working on. The scope and creativity of Bob's interests was enormous, spanning a diversity of topics, from personal space, hard architecture, and social design to sidewalk leaf fossils, mushrooms, and snails. Whenever his campus needed an interim administrator for a department trying to recruit a full-time chair or dean, or one that was going through transitional challenges, Bob was always the go-to leader, the utility player, the person who could step in, regardless of the disciplinary focus of the unit, to bring calm and stable leadership. He was unassuming and modest, despite his distinguished record of scholarly teaching and service contributions at campus, community, and professional levels. I join with colleagues and friends in expressing our heartfelt condolences to Barbara, Bob's children, his grandchildren, his extended family, colleagues, and students around the globe. Bob had a profoundly positive impact on so many of us over so many years. Our memories of his distinguished contributions, gentle personal qualities, and good works throughout his life are enduring. We will miss you.
Hi, My name's Frank Becker, and I'm delighted to talk a little bit about my experiences with Bob over more than 50 years. Um, the interesting thing, in one sense, I just realized is that I'm sitting now about 30 miles from where Bob started his collegiate academic career, which was in Geneva, New York, in the Finger Lakes district, um, uh, about as far in many ways initially from New York City as you could get. On his journey west, going to Kansas and then to Saskatchewan and Canada, and then at UC Davis in California. I've essentially gone in the reverse direction, born in San Francisco, raised in California, and now, for the last 42 years before I retired, at Cornell University in upstate New York. I first met Bob when I came back from a year abroad, junior year abroad, at Sussex University in England. And I was just looking for a job, any kind of work. And so I walked up and down the psych department at UC Davis, seeing if any professor might have something I could do. And Bob did. And that was the beginning of this more than 50-year relationship. And the way it started, again, I've realized there's interesting parallels in some way to his own life. Was my first assignment. He bought me a ticket to LAX airport and said, I want you to go down and sit in the waiting areas, the lounge areas, and just observe and see what you see about how people are using the seating, what they do, what the groups are, and come back and talk to me about what you see. Nothing about, here's the method I want you to use, here's the observation sheet, here's the theory. And essentially, that is exactly how he got started in environmental psychology in Saskatchewan, at the mental institution, we called them that in those days, that Humphrey Osmond led. And Humphrey said, we just won this Canadian Design Award, and I can't see that anything's changed here. It looks exactly the same. Why don't you go out there and see what you see and see if you can figure out what's improved, if anything. And Bob did just that. He just went out and he observed and he saw what people were doing and where they were sitting and how they were using the seating. And that led to his most famous book, Personal Space, The Behavioral Basis of Design, a book that influenced generations of architects and designers and still does today. So that was my introduction to Bob. And I learned, again, these very basic research methods. Bob didn't ever use sophisticated statistics. We didn't talk about multi-factor regression analyses. We did some non-parametric statistics. But you observed the world around you, whether it was bike lanes or whether it was farmers' markets or whether it was food cooperatives or anything else, even including funeral homes and so on. So I really got an approach to research methodology, which was rather unique. But what sticks in my mind about Bob, as much as anything I learned from him in a strictly academic sense, was about life. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Is that I was a foodie in a way that no one would consider being a foodie. My notion of a foodie was you could eat as much as you possibly could. And it wasn't about quality, it was about quantity. And for me, the best restaurant experience was going to a place called Smorgasbob's, where you worked your way from one end of the buffet table to the other, starting anywhere from Mexico and then going to Italian and then to Chinese and then to Texas barbecue. It wasn't what we would call a foodie today. Bob invited my wife to be, Harriet, and myself to a party. And that's where I was introduced to a whole notion of a different approach to food. And that was lobster. Bob had ordered lobster from Maine. And I had never seen anyone demolish food with such passion. That poor lobster's lucky it was dead, because he was sucking every tentacle till there was nothing left. And with it, there was white wine, which was Fumé Blanc, which I'd never had lobster, I'd never had this kind of wine, It was the introduction to a new kind of passion, a different way of thinking about food. And throughout the time I knew Bob, these different layers of Bob kept emerging. And it turns out, as many of people who know Bob know, he was a fabulous artist. And again, what the subject of his art was the world around him: vegetables, kale, broccoli, squash, that he'd seen farmers market. And he was able to capture them not just correctly in a kind of scientific sense, but artistically with a sense of kind of, I don't even know, meaning and emotion. They were wonderful watercolors that he did to the end of his life. He also loved folk art of any sort. So, in addition to books like Personal Space, he wrote street art, which is all about the murals that have been painted up and down California and Oregon coast by street artists. He loved the folk art of Emeryville mudflat sculptures near Berkeley. And he photographed extensively these over years, which later became an exhibit at the Berkeley Art Museum. So there's these other facets of Bob that I suspect many people don't know of, that to me captured him so well, that what he had to an extraordinary degree was a passion for life in all its forms. And all I can say is I'm just really privileged to have been part of that.
Hello, my name is Fredo Lutz from Munich. I'm talking to you from the west coast of Ireland, actually from my camper van. I wanted to talk from outside, but there's a storm. It's an honor for me to make a little contribution to Bob Summer's memorial. To Bob himself, wherever you are now, looking down or listening to us, from a star, from a cloud, from a tree, maybe you're in a forest looking at mushrooms. I want to express my deep gratitude to you, Bob. You were my teacher, my mentor, later my colleague and a friend. We stayed in contact very long. I did graduate in 1986 from UCD in the Community Development program with landscape architecture, and you were on my thesis committee, together with Mark Francis, Rob Thayer, and Dean McCannell. And thank you, Bob, really thank you for teaching me, for making me aware of the environment. Your environmental awareness teaching was great. And at the same time, teaching me research methods and also sharp and clear methodological thinking and writing. Your knowledge and your wisdom, but also your sense of humor, sometimes sarcastic. Just thinking about scenic drowning as a line for a research report, your sense of humor, it lives on in me and myself, like in so many of those who are also present now. And it also lives on in my own students. I did teach since 30 years in Stuttgart and in Weinstefan in Bavaria. And like yourself, that's what I learned from you also. I can't stop teaching. You taught a lot many years after your retirement age. So right now I'm a visiting professor at the other UCD in the world, the University College in Dublin in Ireland. And I'm just starting to build up new ties to UCD in Davis, and we're maybe just starting a cooperation that will also be in the sense of you and people like Mark and Rob and of course myself. I just want to say thank you again and conclude with one sentence. If we had more people like you, Bob Sommer, then the world would be a better place to be. So let's keep on trying all together. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bob Sommer was the person who changed my career direction and inspired my interest in environmental psychology, years before I ever had a chance to meet him. In this, my story is probably more common than unique, given Bob's impact on the field. In 1974, I was in Los Angeles for a predoctoral clinical psychology internship. My work was in a brand new community mental health center in which I spent a fair amount of time grumbling about the building design. So many spaces felt awkward, uncomfortable, non-functional, for me and I thought for the clients. After one such grumbling session, somebody gave me a copy of Bob's classic book, Personal Space, which I quickly followed with his then brand new Tight Spaces, and I was hooked, and I stayed hooked. I quickly changed my dissertation topic to an environmental one, crowding, and I stumbled into a study of the design of a new jail and have continued to find the field endlessly fascinating. Others, especially as students, knew him better than I, but over the years I had several opportunities to hear, meet, and work with Bob, most closely in 1993 when he served on the selection committee for the Rudy Bruner Award for Urban Excellence. Those long review meetings provided an excellent opportunity to see Bob at work in a non-typical setting as part of a panel that included quite a variety of people: a big city mayor, architect, urban planner, preservationist, and community-based developer. Bob, I saw, was a great listener, worked exceptionally well as part of a team, and when he spoke, he always advanced the level and quality of the discussion. I always felt more grounded in the field, knowing that Bob was somewhere way out west, still thinking and writing about people and places. His absence will be felt, and I will miss him.
Hello, colleagues at the American Psychological Association. My name's Catherine Anthony, and I'm an ACSA Distinguished Professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which you see behind me on the screen. Today, I'd like to pay a brief, belated, but heartfelt tribute to Bob Sommer, one of the most influential mentors in my career. I first met Bob while a young student at Berkeley in the PhD program in social and behavioral factors in design. It was in the Department of Architecture. I'd been inspired by Bob's work and by his writings, and I had a chance to meet him at a party at Berkeley. So I asked, how do we get to study with you, even though I'm a student at Berkeley, not at Davis? And he proceeded to give me directions how to get to Davis from Berkeley, from the freeway, and taking the freeway exit. And I said, very good, except for one thing, I don't have a car. But I found a way. I took an intercampus bus that traveled between Berkeley and Davis, and I traveled once a week with the library books that were exchanged between both campuses, and I was able to work with Bob on a study of cigarette smoking and personal space that we did in his office. The study was published. Eventually, Bob and Barb were kind enough to include it in their book, A Practical Guide to Behavioral Research. It was one of my very first publications, and it was very exciting to see it in print. Bob and Barb both were extremely supportive of younger colleagues like myself, and they helped us launch successful careers. Their unique ability to write on so many different topics, from salad bars to farmers markets to bike paths, airports, and zoos, and to reach so many different audiences, including, most importantly, the general public, taught many life lessons that rubbed off on all their students. My students, in turn, were inspired by so many of their writings. Bob was a model academician who took on many leadership roles in his profession and his campus. I'm eternally grateful to Bob for his mentorship and friendship. I am 100% Greek background, both sides of the family, and we have an expression when someone passes away. As we Greeks say, may his memory be eternal. And with the lasting legacy that Bob leaves behind, I'm sure that it will be. Thank you so much.
I'm Marina Estabrook, and I have known Bob since 1965. I worked with him on his research. I was his teaching assistant. And then later on, we did a lot of research projects together. Bob was extraordinarily helpful to his colleagues and also his fellow, and also to graduate students.
and he would always come up with research projects, and he always said that the research opportunities, you just have to look around. And that was his whole motto, that there is something to be solved everywhere in your environment. And one time I came to him, I had to give a talk somewhere, and I was terribly nervous. And he gave me one piece of advice that has stuck with me forever. That when you're in that situation, just think of yourself as a social scientist. And so whenever I would go and I get nervous, I would withdraw from myself as my person. I'd see myself as a researcher, and I'd look at them all as subjects doing something or other. And that has helped me enormously. Anyway, he was a lovely man, a genius. There was only one Bob Sommer in this world, and I'm honored to have been part of his life.
Okay, so I first met Bob through his book, Personal Space. I had gone back to school at Sac State to get a degree in psychology after I'd been kicked out of architecture school at Cal Poly. And I also knew him early on because Judy Corbett was in one of the first human ecology graduate groups. And it turns out that at every turn we kept running into Bob, because if there was something innovative happening, he knew about it and was involved. And so when we decided to do Village Homes, we needed investors, and he jumped right on there. He said, this sounds like a good idea. And so he was an investor in that. And then often would offer critiques on things I was doing. So he was very, very valuable resource for all the innovative things I wanted to do.
I'm Yvonne Clearwater, and I started working with Bob Sommer in 1972, and all the way through my doctoral work, completed my doctorate in 1979. Bob was my mentor, and I've only assigned that role to one person in my life, with all the magnificent people I've worked with throughout my storied career. Bob was really fundamental in inspiring me and serving as a collaborator. Even from the very beginning, when I was a student and he was a tenured professor, our work was collaborative in nature. And when I showed an interest in participatory art, and I started painting murals. In fact, the first two murals to hang on exterior walls in UC campuses, Bob came out and helped me paint. Seeing that I could take these things on and a lot of work. So he would come out and actually execute on that. When I was a fresh graduate student, I was showing a bit of disdain and annoyance with the design of classrooms. And Bob's one of his fundamental tenets was that you can think globally, but work locally. Work where you're planted, work from the seed of where you are now. So he helped me understand that the only way to get in and do something about this was to become involved in the system. So I got myself assigned as the first student member of the Architectural Design Review Committee on campus. And Bob was so surprised that I started inviting him to come to these meetings. So we took kind of a grassroots approach to a number of things like that. Like Judy Corbett, I also worked for Jerry Brown, for Governor Brown, and in California State Architecture. And Bob was inspirational to me in this way too, because I was looking for a way to combine what was now becoming an early career thrust with actually getting my research done within the graduate program. So he helped me, and he coined the term double dipping. All you're doing is double dipping. And using that work. Later on, when I was pirated away from my career in architecture by NASA to serve on the Space Station, International Space Station design team. I headed up habitability research for NASA, and I ended up being with NASA for over 30 years. So I hired Bob as a consultant to come and work with me then. It was such a great turnaround to bring him in to help me with the privacy guidelines and the interpersonal spacing as a function of microgravity for space station. So I remained good friends and colleagues and collaborators with Bob from 72 right up to this year in 21. So thank you, Bob Sommer.
Hello, my name is Rob Thayer. I'm a professor emeritus at UC Davis. I retired some years back, and I'd like to read something that I wrote about my introduction to Bob Sommer before we ever even met. And if you pardon me, I'd like to read this so that I don't miss all the points. The story begins with me reading Bob Sommer's book, Personal Space, when I was a graduate student at Stanford in 1971. I was quite taken by the new field that Bob and others had ushered in, and began reading voraciously in this new field of environmental psychology, and there wasn't that much literature at the time. One day, I traded my Volkswagen bus for the smallest car ever imported to the United States. My friend had to move some furniture, so I took a ride in his 500cc Honda micro sedan, and I got a speeding ticket in Newark, California, where I lived, doing 40 in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. And I was dirt poor at the time, so I went to the judge to see what else I could do to other than pay. And he asked me, well, do you want to do time? And I said, well, what does that mean? He said, I'll sentence you to one day in prison. They'll probably book you and kick you. I said, okay. So I thought this might be a good way to learn about personal space and environmental psychology, by going to prison. So off I went in the caged bus to Santa Rita, Alameda County's flagship lockdown. There was a riot in the prison that night. Some skunks had gotten into the maximum security cells, and 10 carloads of California Highway patrolmen showed up to quell the uproar, and after 13 hours, I finally left the bullpen, which is what they called the cage that lump all the prisoners of every type together. There were about 60 of us in this literal cage, and one exposed toilet that everyone could see. So how's that for environmental psychology? It was emotionally excruciating. Because of the riot in the nearby maximum security prison, rumors began to spread that they would send us to San Quentin. Unfortunately, those rumors were not true. I spent the night in the low security outbuilding where the hierarchy of races was reversed. The blacks were on top, the Chicanos were next, and the whites were very much on the bottom of the totem pole. When I told the other inmates what I was in for, I expected them to laugh. But instead, they teared up and said, "You're going home." And then the next thing they did was ask me, "Can I have your jacket? Can I have your pillow? Can I have your blanket?" Which I gladly relinquished. The next day, on the way out through the gate in the guard building, I heard some prison guard, bragging about a gun that he had that was the same one that was used to kill Alberto Salazar. And I was not very happy with that. And as my wife drove out past the prison vegetable garden, I raised the fist in the radical salute, and 5 or 6 fists working in the field answered me. So all of this was triggered by reading Bob Sommer's Personal Space book. I don't believe I ever told him this story. I tried to give it to Barbara to tell him, but Bob beat me to the punch and passed away before I could tell him. But it was clearly one of the boldest and perhaps most foolish thing that I ever did. And I reflect upon this frequently. Perhaps the most genuine example of participatory research I've ever done. And some years later, I applied for a faculty position at UC Davis, and then only then discovered that Bob was already teaching here. And I thought, hey, this must be a decent place. And I was hired in the mid-70s, and the rest is history. So I'm proud to read the story of my interaction, and I only wish that I had told Bob sooner. Thanks.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be able to honor Bob. He had an incredible influence on my life and pretty much everything that I've done. Back when I was a student wife with a husband in architecture, and I was looking at the kinds of spaces that they were organizing and presenting in class, and I thought, you know, some of those I just really wouldn't want to live there. And I wonder how design influences how you behave or you feel. And I was talking about that to an architect, and he said, got a book for you. And it was Personal Space. And went out and got the book, discovered, oh my gosh, Dr. Robert Sommer, he teaches at the school where I got my bachelor's degree. This is fantastic. So when my husband wanted to move back to Sacramento for business reasons, I said, I'm going back to graduate school and I want to study under Bob Sommer. And at the time I was going to graduate school and learning all these wonderful things, and as everyone will say about him, he just looks at the world as an experiment. I was able to do something called Village Homes, which is designed as a sustainable community with a strong sense of community. And I was able to take the things, the research and the things that I had learned under Bob and say, okay, let's take these theories and apply them. 40 years later, strong sense of community, and that's one of the major things that draws people to live there. So that worked. And then after that, I went to work under the Jerry Brown administration and wanted to look at how we influence public policy for better neighborhood and community design, and proposed putting together local elected officials like we had in Davis, the progressive ones, and assigning them by the governor to implement more sustainable community practices in their cities and counties. And we at that time then became a nonprofit to keep it going, and we put together something called the Awani Principles for Livable Communities. And that incorporated a lot of the ideas that I developed under Bob, and it became actually nationally known. I understand that it's in planning schools. I've gotten 2 national awards from the American Planning Association and the League of California Cities for those principles. And when I think back about what Bob meant to me, my life would not have been anywhere near as rewarding and as productive as it was because of him. So thank you, Bob.
Hello, colleagues. Robert Sommer was my most important advisor and mentor in graduate school at UC Davis. Knowing of my interest in captivity and behavior, he directed me to read the books and papers, and there were a lot of them, of Heine Hediger, a Swiss zoo biologist and professor of ethology at the University of Zurich. Now, Hediger was also distinguished by the fact he was the director of all 3 Swiss zoos at one time in his career. He was a scholar who studied personal space in animals, and Bob found his work to be very useful when he was writing his iconic book, Personal Space. I met Hediger in Zurich late in his career when I interviewed him on videotape, so other English speakers would learn about his powerful ideas. The recording is available in English on YouTube. On a visit to see Bob in California, he gave me a fine little book, a textbook that Hediger had given him. It was a book on animal behavior in German, Tierpsychologie it was called, by Heidegger's teacher, whose name just happened to be Robert Sommer. I'm so honored that Bob chose to share this book with me, and I will someday pass it on to one of my students. Bob and I were working on a review paper when he died, reminding environmental psychologists of the biological foundations of their field. It will soon be published in the Australian journal Animals. I'm not sure, but it may be Bob's last publication. I spent much of my career extolling the value of Bob's concept of hard architecture. His ideas have had a profound impact on the progress of animal welfare. At a conference of the Environmental Design Research Association in 1989, Bob told the audience that zoos were the only one of the hard environments that he had studied that actually improved. And he gave the credit to the scientific work that psychologists and their students were doing that were conducted for this purpose. That is the purpose of improving zoos and making them acceptable. And my students in the audience were beaming at the proclamations, and of course, we've always given Bob credit for inspiring all of our work. Bob's encouragement and wise counsel made a huge difference in my career in academia, and it led me to be a leader in the zoo profession itself. I will forever be grateful to him for honoring me with 50 years of friendship and mentorship. Rest in peace, Bob.
I'm Richard Koss. I'm a former, retired professor from UC Davis in the psychology department where Bob was teaching. And before I actually joined the department, I visited Bob in 1972 when we had a nice discussion about environmental psychology, and I realized this was an interesting place to come. And so I really set my goals on coming to Davis and working possibly with Bob or working in an area related to Bob's work. And so Bob at that time was very interested in space planning and the individual differences in how people position themselves, how they behaved in classrooms, particularly the size of the classrooms and some of the aspects of how much students would be engaged based upon the kind of comfort of the furniture. So Bob did a lot of really important work, and really, of course, the impact was really broad for the field because he basically was one of the founders of what we would think of environmental psychology from a psychological perspective. So anyway, Bob was a wonderful friend. He also introduced me to my current wife after my first wife died, and so he sort of in a way salvaged my emotions very strongly. And so that was an important kind of contribution as well, which is very personal. But together, Bob was really a wonderful colleague, very insightful. He brought up a lot of ideas. He really could bring things to light from a perspective that was kind of unusual because he would have the interest in architecture and interior design as well as the psychological background, including even clinical background, where he could begin to look at people's problems, how they might behave in certain settings, and from that address questions, which he did with a number of undergraduate students and particularly graduate students, some of whom have gone on and become well known in their fields. So this is something where I'm very pleased I can tell you about the experiences I had with Bob, and I'm delighted to do this.